My name is Mike Conley. I'm a writer. I'm not a scientist. I'm a writer. I have a particular talent in being able to read some highfalutin stuff, discuss it with PhDs, and then explain it to people in everyday language. The approach I take is, as I explained to my plumber, you don't need to be a hydraulic engineer to understand plumbing. It's the same thing with nuclear power. All my books, the most complicated mathematics in the books is arithmetic. If you can handle fractions and decimal points, you can handle all the math. It's not even math, it's arithmetic. This is not a complicated subject. There are a lot of pieces of the puzzle, and there's some weird terms which I explain because, these 20th century nerds come up with all these terms. So you explain them and you're fine, And so my job or the job I've taken on is to explain nuclear power to regular people such as myself. I mean, I have a high school diploma and I was a house painter and a handyman, but I could read and I could think and I could write. And I waded into this subject and figured out how to explain it to my plumber. And everything I write is backed up by a zillion endnotes, and it's all reviewed by 4, 5, or 6 PhDs in the subject. So yeah, I'm a writer, but they have my back and I have a very deep bench. So any question anyone has in any of my books, I can hook you up. Mostly I can hook up people directly with a PhD or engineer that could directly answer the question that deals with the subject on a professional basis. So I'm just writing what these guys figured out. I'm not a scientist, all right? But you're lucky because not being a scientist, I never learned how to write in highfalutin, annoyingly dry scientific language. I can read it. I don't know why anybody else will write that way. But anyway, I break it down. I take highfalutin stuff and explain it to lowfalutin people. That's my job. Well, the crime is the attempted murder of nuclear power with bad science, or what we abbreviate, or what I abbreviate as BS. The main culprit is Dr. Herman Muller, who 98 years ago came up with an idea that has never been proven. Tons of evidence to show that it's not correct, and it's still being used by our regulatory agencies to overregulate nuclear power, almost to the point of snuffing it out of existence. I think a lot of it has to do just with plain old nuclear fear. Nuclear energy is incredibly dense, and so it has enormous power from small amounts of substances. That alone makes people kind of leery, which is entirely understandable. Um, Also, the problem is that nuclear energy was introduced through weapons. So the world's first taste of nuclear energy or nuclear power or the power of the atom came from destroying 2 cities in Japan in 1945. I liken it to, what if we had ended the Civil War with a barrage of napalm in several large cities? And then 30 years later, we come out and go, hey, the stuff we made the napalm with, well, we call it gasoline, and we can put it in this engine and make your car, and you don't need horses. And it's like, you mean the stuff that we burned out? No, thank you. So it's the way. One big thing is the way the science was introduced to the public scared the bejesus out of them. And we've been trying to assuage concerns ever since. And Herman Muller's bad science fits right into that paranoia. Well, what we think about it is that, in light of the fact that it is bad science, nuclear energy is actually far, far less dangerous than people have been led to believe. And the obvious conclusion is, well, if that's the case, we should build more of it and get our costs down to where they're building it in Asia, which is the normal price that would be expected if you are building large things over and over again, costs come down, supply lines get into shape, and it all becomes a workmanlike project. So the concern about nuclear energy has been vastly overblown, the dangers. And the obvious flip side of that is, well, heck, if it isn't as dangerous as we've been led to believe, let's build more of it. Well, pretty much right in the beginning of what Herman Muller was doing is he used fruit flies and he zapped them with 130 million times the average background dose that we all receive on this planet, which is about 3 millisieverts a year average. As millisievert, just a measurement, we have to get into it. Anyway, he zapped fruit flies with 130 million times background dose. And yeah, he saw genetic damage. Well, gosh, he thought he had discovered some big thing. So then with his students, he had them run experiments with 40 million times and 25 million times. And of course, they all saw damage. And he drew a line between those 3 points and extrapolated it all the way down to zero dose, zero bad effect. And he said, voila, you can expect damage in the low dose range because look at the damage in the high dose range. It's just entirely unscientific. And there's no confirmation of anything happening in the low dose range as he predicted 98 years ago. They're still looking for evidence. But just to be safe, we should be really scared. That's basically it in a nutshell. Well, following on what I was talking about, it is not harmful in low doses. It is extremely harmful in extremely high doses. I'll give you an analogy. It is provably true and science that if you drink 2 gallons of water in one sitting, you're probably going to die. We can extrapolate from there and say, well, what if you drink 1 gallon in one sitting? Well, maybe half of the people will die. Okay, you can take a line from those 2 points and draw them straight down to zero and go, therefore, if a million people drink one drop of water each, one of them will die. That's basically how irrational the science, quote unquote, behind this is. It's bad science. It's simply BS. Okay, well, there's three main models of radiation harm. One is the linear threshold model, which is what I've been talking about. You draw a straight line from high dose effects down to zero, and you say, well, it just progresses linearly, less radiation, less bad stuff, more radiation, more bad stuff, all the way down to zero with no threshold dose. What's a threshold dose? A threshold dose is something that you can recover from below a certain threshold, like you can take one aspirin a day and you're fine. Okay. Your body recovers. You have 101 sitting, you're going to die. All right. But you can't extrapolate that linearly down to zero. It isn't like 1 in a million or 1 in 10,000 will die from an aspirin. Anyway, so you combine the three models to reach a compromise with which policymakers can act. And the first model is linear. The second one is a threshold model. It's like everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. Oh, we're starting to get some damage. Right. The third model is what is called a hermetic model, which is, and there's a lot of evidence to support this, is that very small doses of radiation are actually beneficial because similar to an allergen, a little tickle of something bad will increase your body's defenses to respond. And so that's something called a J curve. We actually get a little bit of benefit. And then as we get more and more dose, it erases, and then you have harm. If you blend all those three together and arbitrarily pick one extra cancer case in 10,000 and align all the three models up on that agreed upon bad beginning of bad stuff. Okay. You can, all the models will work and we can move ahead without arguing about, the super, super, super minor low dose effects. which haven't been found. And we can proceed from there. And one extra cancer case in 10,000 is statistically equivalent to zero. Okay. In other words, you can't see it in the statistics if you assign that arbitrary threshold. So all three models could function and we could proceed with that arbitrary assumption, which is quite workable. And that is what the optimization model is blending the three models so people will quit arguing and quit going for extreme perfection and just get the job done of building out clean power. It would have been fantastically different. I'll give you just one example among many. President John Kennedy in 1962 his administration put out a proposal, a study to have 50% of U.S. electricity nuclear by the year 2000. Okay. And had we not been burdened with this overweening sense of nuclear fear from the least smidgen of radiation and been sensible about it, that could have happened. And can you imagine if half of US electricity back in 25 years ago was nuclear, and then we're building all these small modular reactors and the Generation 4 reactors and the molten salt reactors. And in my view, if nuclear had been built out so people could see how safe it was, then the whole notion of trying to power the world or the nation with wind and solar would have been a pipe dream. And now people are taking it seriously only because they don't allow themselves to think about nuclear, because they've been taught since jump that nuclear is hellaciously expensive. Not true. It can be. And it is hellaciously harmful. Not true. It can be. There's important differences there. You've been lied to. I'm sorry, but the honest answer is you've been lied to, misinformed, disinformed, uninformed. Let me give you a small example. 3 Mile Island was the only major nuclear accident in the United States of America. There was a partial meltdown with a huge downward cloud of radioactive material, and the nation understandably freaked out. I mean, quite understandable. However, when the dust settled, no pun intended, and measurements were taken, it turned out that the average downwind dose received by any human being was less than one chest x-ray. Okay. Nonetheless, we weren't told that. We weren't educated about that. And the nation as a whole flipped out over an unscheduled chest x-ray. So, and we've been skittish ever since. Another example, Fukushima. 20,000 people died in the earthquake and tsunami. No one died from radiation or was injured by radiation after 3 major meltdowns. Full tilt boogie, no BS meltdowns. I mean, not like 3 Mile Island. These were like hellaciously huge, full meltdowns. If somebody had stood at the fence of the plant and watched the entire thing play out, the worst dose they would have received would have equaled to one whole body CT scan. But everybody's afraid of nuclear power. I mean, ironically, Fukushima shows you how safe it actually is. Those were reactors built in the 60s. They shut down within seconds after the earthquake began. The problem with the reactors was that the site was excavated down to 10 meters above sea level, 30 feet, to make it easier to build them. So whoever designed the site was a knucklehead, and nobody had the guts to say, boss, you're wrong. Okay. If you want to know what happened at Fukushima, you have to understand what happened in Onagawa. It was a 3-reactor plant up the coast, the closest plant to the earthquake epicenter in the entire country of Japan. Nothing happened to those reactors. Why? Because their backup generators were on high ground and they didn't get drowned on the beach. The Fukushima reactor's backup generators were literally in a basement on the beach. and the water sloshes up and gets in the basement, and there goes the backup generators, and then the reactors overheat, and there you go. Okay, it's just like a big V8. When you turn off the car and you still hear the fan going to keep the radiator, right? That's supposed to happen. That's like an emergency backup generator basic concept. And as we all know, if you overheat a big V8, you're going to have problems. Don't overheat the thing. So that's the thing about a light water reactor. And Fukushima melted down because it was not built in the right place. The reactors were fine, but they were placed in the wrong place, particularly the backup generators. So when you start learning these things, then you go like, wait a minute, we got to get this perspective. We freaked out because we associated the 20,000 deaths with nuclear power, and they were completely, utterly unrelated to nuclear power, except there were a couple thousand deaths that resulted from an unnecessary evacuation, and the people got stuck in traffic. There were elderly patients, and it was very cold outside, and the buses were stopped, and they died from cold. Okay, but they were evacuated because, oh my God, the reactors melted down. Instead of measuring what the radiation release was, they just threw everybody on the road in the middle of an earthquake and a tsunami. And that's how they died. So they didn't die from nuclear power, they died from nuclear fear. And nuclear fear is and always will be far more dangerous than nuclear power itself. I mean, take a look at Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a disaster, and no one is ever going to build a reactor like that again. But it keeps on being brought up as like, well, what about Chernobyl? Well, what about it? I mean, that's like bringing up the Ford Pinto in a discussion of automobile safety. Everybody knows that nobody's going to build a Ford Pinto again. But when it comes to nuclear power, everybody thinks they're going to build another Chernobyl. And so this is just unreasoning, uneducated, miseducated, propagandized nuclear fear that has no basis in actual history or reality, that can easily be explained, as I do in my books, in plain language, because you don't need to be a nuclear physicist to understand this stuff. It's not that complicated, but there's been a lot of misinformation that's been passed down through the years. And the LNT report gets down to the kernel of that, which is the nuclear fear, which was predicated largely on Mueller's bad science that there is always some harm, that there's never a safe dose, that you always are going to get in trouble if you get around nuclear power. That is just simply not correct. It is akin to saying don't ever go out in the sunshine because you will get skin cancer. That's how absolute it is, and it's absolute nonsense because there's no absolutes in the physical universe. Nothing in life proceeds in a linear fashion. The body has an adaptive response to stressors. In fact, we have more DNA damage from oxidation, which our body repairs to the tune of about 1 trillion, I'm not exaggerating, repairs in our cells each day, not 1 trillion in each cell, but cumulative effect I think it's about 1 trillion. It might be 10 trillion. Anyway, our body cells are constantly repairing DNA damage from oxidation. And yes, radiation will also damage the cells. But when you get down to that small of a level, unless you have a huge whopping dose of radiation that's blatantly obvious to be damaging, any quote unquote damage that might occur from low doses is lost in the noise of damage from other things, which the cells routinely repair. So what's been left out of the discussion is the biological adaptive response to a stressor. Our cells learned how to repair radiation damage before they learned how to repair oxidation damage. So we were good. Our ancestors our pond scum ancestors were better at repairing radiation damage than oxidation damage, and they learned it before oxygen even came along. So we've been doing this for a real long time. And if those single cell organisms were not champions at repairing radiation, we literally physically would not be here having this discussion. Me and my partner, writing partner, Tim Maloney, were working on the third book, which will now be the third book. And then we got through it and we're like, we got to explain all this basic radiation safety fear stuff to people before they can sit down and read this third book. So we wrote the first book as an explainer, and then I wrote the second book, which is a deep dive into LNT, one aspect of nuclear power problems. And so people can have their questions answered so they can look at the third book and take it objectively. And the third book is an exploration of a 100% national nuclear grid versus a 100% wind and solar grid, which is a quite popular concept these days. And once you have read the first two books, you will be fully prepared to read the third one without going, yeah, what about the radiation? Yeah, but what about the waste? Yeah, what about Hiroshima? Well, yeah, what about Fukushima? Blah, 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 blah. Because the other two books answer that. And then you can read and absorb a sensible discussion about the benefits of nuclear power versus the benefits or problems of wind and solar. So it is a trilogy, and you can just read the third book if you're like cool on the other stuff, but most people aren't. And so it is a full education in very plain language for regular people about pretty much the entire scope of the issue. Attacking it 9 ways from Sunday and answering questions. And to me, I mean, the conclusion is inescapable. Nuclear power is a by far superior technology. It can do and will do what the renewables folks want to achieve. A reliable, sustainable grid of clean energy production for the entire nation for decades on end. That is achievable with nuclear power. We explain a roadmap to nowhere why it will be hellaciously difficult to do the same with wind and solar. Okay. So the three books are all leading up to the main event, which is Roadmap to Nowhere. But the other two books are absolutely vital to understand the subject so you can absorb the argument between nuclear and renewables without getting off on these tangents about, yeah, but what about the waste? Which we handle in the first book. Yeah, what about radiation, which we handle in the second book and the first book, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like it's a trilogy.